Good day and welcome. I tell you what, today's edition of Speaker Spotlight is with my good friend Dave Bricker. I'll tell you, Dave and I went through the Speakers Academy together. It seems like 100 years ago. It really was only 5 or 6. But I'm just happy to have Dave with me today. Dave, how are you, my man?
James, I am barely perfect. I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me on the show today.
It's awesome. It's awesome. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to get right to it today. So, Dave, you're known as the storytelling guy, right? How does that? Let's first talk about your business. How does that? How does that work with your business, and how do you weave storytelling and the need to be able to tell stories to be effective in business and leadership? How do you weave that into your business?
Well, that's the whole big question. That's everything rolled into one, isn't it? So I've been fascinated by stories all of my life. And have you ever noticed how if you start a movie, very often you'll finish that movie, even if in the first 10 minutes intellectually you're thinking, this is a really stupid movie, this is horrible. And 90 minutes later, you're like, why did I watch it? Because you had to find out how the story ended. And
Right.
We are so wired for story. And what happens when we tell a story is we divert people. They're paying attention to their cell phones. We're all hunter-gatherers at heart, right? We scan the world for threats, opportunities. Oh, something might be an opportunity or a threat, in which case we run. But as speakers, we're not in the threat business, right? We're in the opportunity business. But then you bring somebody into a story, and then they are scanning for threats and opportunities inside your story. And that makes you the guide. So if I take you out on a sailing trip in a storm in the Gulf Stream on a cold, rough night, unless you've been in that situation before, and fortunately most people haven't, fortunately for them and for me, then people are kind of looking for me to get them out of the situation. But they forget that they're sitting in front of a screen, talking to a camera, or watching a movie screen, or what. They're in your story. Now that's influence, and it's powerful and it's wonderful. It's a wonderful skill to be able to teach people to use.
Okay, so that's a wonderful segue to my next question. When I first met you, you were working on a wooden boat. Remember that? You were working on a boat. I don't know if you call it rejuvenating, or you were working on a boat. And I asked you about story sailing. How does story sailing fit into your overall story and how you perform your business? Tell them a little bit about that.
I lived on a sailboat for many years because I was captivated by the stories of the people I'd met who lived on boats. They weren't wealthy people, they weren't well-to-do people, but when it was time to go see the world, they just went out and did it. And I thought, you mean you don't have to go to the movie theater or read a book to have an adventure? I want some of that. I want stories for me. So I really dedicated myself to that. I finished college. By the time I graduated, I was already living on a little 26-foot fixer-upper sailboat. And then I worked graduated, worked for 6 months, threw my keys into Biscayne Bay and took off with $40 in my pocket to the Bahamas and enjoyed this carefree life as a boat bum, odd jobbing my way around, just enjoying life, getting in and out of all sorts of wonderful trouble. And I carried all of those stories around with me for a while. I crossed the Atlantic on a wooden boat with a friend in 1991. We were 38 days of sailing, crossing the Atlantic, and I had these marvelous experiences. And then, of course, what happens when you've got a big story? You're kind of a freak, right? Like, oh, now I relate to nobody. So you kind of put that stuff in the back. But then I realized that, storytelling is all about the journey. And there are storytellers who have climbed Mount Everest or trained for a marathon or tried to raise a special needs child. We all have stories. Anybody with a pet, anyone who's been in a relationship has a story. It's all about the journey. So I use my sailing journeys as a metaphor for my audience's journeys in life and in business. And it's just as effective as anything else, but I have a particularly nautical, simple model for how stories work.
Awesome. So let's switch gears just a little bit. I'm a business leader. I'm a professional speaker. Why are stories so important to me being effective?
Stories are important for a number of reasons. First of all, like I said, when you can pull somebody into a story, you're putting them almost in a trance. You are getting past all of those intellectual filters and you're hitting them in an emotional place, because the things that we care about, my number one rule of storytelling is that stories are always about people. And if you're talking about the people in your audience, then they're going to pay attention because the story's about them. If you're talking about prices, processes, ingredients, data, you're not telling stories. And if you're not telling stories, you're not connecting. And if you're not connecting, you're not selling. And of course, selling is not the way we get people to part with their money. That's a byproduct of how we get people to know, like, and trust us. So they ask to do business with us.
Okay, one of the things that comes to mind when I think of that, when you say that, is a lot of times in my business career, I mean, I just went to work every day. I did my thing. I put my head down. I worked. I was kind of boring. Spent a lot of time in the library. I don't have a lot of stories. What if I'm a guy that doesn't have a lot of stories? Where do I go then?
I think that there are too many people who feel that they don't have a lot of stories. But I'll tell you what, James, like I know that, I mean, you're a religious leader. And I'm guessing that at some point in your life, you felt called to go study and pursue that and be of service to something bigger than yourself. There's a story. Is everyone going to relate to that? It depends on how you tell it. But you don't need to be a member of your particular denomination, of your particular religion, to understand what it's like to feel called to something or someone. So there's a way you can take your journey and make it universal. Anybody who's raised a pet or a child or been in a relationship, we all have stories. You know what? Give me 4 people in the working in cubicles, and you'd never know it, but the notes that get passed around and the jokes over those walls, those 4 people have a little community that is so rich in stories that if they're there for a couple of years, you could write a book about these 4 people working in their cubicles in company X. You'd never know it, but we all have stories. And what we need to do is develop our story consciousness so that we're always looking for stories. And I think as professional speakers, we tend to do that. We collect, oh, that's a great story. Oh, something terrible happened to me. It's okay. You got a story out of it.
Yeah. Well, that's a great term. I think if I'm quoting you correct, you said my story consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
I love that term. But as you say that, one of the things that I'm trying to learn to do is to journal, like to log what happens during the course of my day. Do you have any suggestions for people to kind of keep up with these stories and be able to kind of place them, put them into a place or a situation so that next year when I'm writing a keynote or if I'm doing a presentation for my employees, that I can refer to that?
So it's interesting that you use the term journal, because we have this idea of storytelling versus journalism. And as we look at the world and try to filter the stories out of it, a lot of people write down something that happened. I went to a meeting yesterday and got to speak with James Henderson. Okay, that's great, but that's not a story. I mean, unless you know James Henderson, but in the real world, that's not a story, right? So what we look for is not just events that happen, but outcomes for people. Be a journeyist, not a journalist. And can you find incidences where there is some voyage from the rocky, stormy seas of conflict to the safe port of transformation, where somebody realizes something, somebody grows, somebody gains a new skill, somebody becomes aware of a pattern they weren't aware of before, and they go, wow, I'm really sorry. I didn't know I made you feel that way. Whatever it is, if it's in personal life, it's in business, where a block gets removed or a bridge gets built and somebody advances to the next level. Stories are all about transformation.
If my mom were still alive, she would tell you that as a child, I had an active imagination. And I would tell stories that weren't quite 100% true, right? So I'm a speaker. I'm a business leader. How appropriate is it? When is it appropriate to use a story that may not be 100% true?
I love this question because we all want to act with integrity. Now, in journalism, we want to try to be 100% true because we're relating facts, we're relating events, and we're creating a historical record. And yet, if someone were to interview the two of us a month from now independently, we're going to recall different parts of this meeting. Whatever the universal truth is, even in the recording, I'm looking at you, you're looking at me, right? We have completely different experiences with this, even if we had the windows side to side. Whatever it is, we're having different experiences, and there is no one universal truth. And meanwhile, nobody's going after J.K. Rowling or Dan Brown for lying to everybody, right? So the purpose of a story is to engage the audience, is ultimately to transform the audience. And by audience, that could be someone you're driving around showing property to. It could be one person. It could be somebody you're trying to get a date with or a raise from. It doesn't matter the size of the audience. But tell a story that is going to have the impact you desire, that's going to bring about that transformation. I think people put so much emphasis on fact. We are not journalists, we're journeyists.
Right. And the opposite of that is most of the journalists put more emphasis on falsehood.
Different problem, yes.
But anyway, so I want to switch gears because I don't want to diminish your skills, Dave, because you spend a lot of time working with people on presentation skills as well. I want to start by asking, where does storytelling and presentation skills meet? Are they one and the same? Can someone be really great at presentation skills but horrible at storytelling, or great at storytelling and horrible at presentation skills? How does that work together?
Well, I think we see it all the time, and we see plenty of people who are horrible at both. But under the umbrella, okay, I'm cynical sometimes, but under the umbrella of storytelling, we have what to say and how to say it. But once we've crafted what to say, and this, it always blows my mind that professional speechwriters will write these eloquent speeches and hand them off to somebody, and they must be thinking, my God, I hope they don't butcher this. Because even though the words are there, the impact of those words is not going to be realized. So I can give you an example. It would be, take a simple line like, the hardest thing to live with is regret. Okay, we can all get that. What a great way to open a speech, right? But what if we say, the hardest thing to live with is regret. Now I stretched that pause in there until it almost broke. But you knew what I was going to say. The audience here listening to us knows what I was going to say, but like, come on, give it to me. What is it? What's the answer? And the impact of your words lives not in the words themselves, but in the echo of the words. What can you do to change the dynamics? Because so many speakers become monodynamic and they put on their radio announcer voice because, hey, we're trying to impress people and impact people and punch, punch, punch. But isn't it more impactful to get really powerful and dynamic? And then ask people to think. And that's the ups and downs. It's the highs, the lows, the loud, the soft, the mild, the wild, and teaching people to use this marvelous instrument that we've been given, this incredible speaking machine. And it's like learning to play a musical instrument. If you don't study it, if you don't really learn how to use it, maybe you come up with the words and maybe you can speak those words forcefully. But if you really want to impact people, if you really want the stories to stick, you have to understand where to put those pauses in so that people fill in the blanks. Then they're part of the story.
Right. Let me ask you this question. Is there one or two deficiencies that are common among a lot of speakers that you work with? Is there something that shows up more often than not?
Well, I've worked with some professional speakers. Usually I work with business people and executives. And of course, the most common one is imposter syndrome. And as professional speakers, look, guess what? We've all dealt with that too. And we continue to deal with it because we're human and we're humble. Either that, or my father always said narcissism is the only disease in the world where the sicker you are, the better you feel. And we know a few of those folks, but but realistically, but executives especially, they're in this place where like they can't show it. You know, that's like when they're leading their troops into battle, it's like, yeah, give me my red shirt. You know, I mean, they yeah, give me the red jacket. They don't want to show pain or fear, but you know, business leaders really need that. And then I think there are a lot of people on lower levels of the corporate ladder who are just, again, they're struggling with that anxiety. Oh, it's my day to present today. And what happens is they don't get help. Look, it doesn't have to be me. Get help with your PowerPoint. Get help with your presentation, with crafting the outline for it. And learn the skill, because once you learn the skill, you start selling your ideas and keeping people awake. The amount of money that's wasted on unproductive meetings around the world, I looked it up once, it's staggering. So I think one of the biggest mistakes that speakers make is, I've got to figure this out by myself.
Right. As you say that, I was having a conversation with someone else about a week ago, and we were talking about people being afraid to be a beginner. I was also having a conversation just last night about the fact, I was actually talking to Ed Robinson, who's going to be our May speaker, about the fact that people who are like in NSA, FSA, you know, sometimes when someone comes and they're a new speaker, they're an aspiring speaker, we assign them that, hey, well, they're a new speaker, so they're not pros at what they do. Some of the people that are aspiring speakers are the best in their industry at what they do. They're just not really good at speaking. And they've gotten that far doing what they do, and now they've finally realized that it's okay to be a beginner. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I guess my offshoot of that is, how many, I mean, and we've heard this, don't tell people you're a speaker, tell people you're a subject matter expert. And that's great, but we all went to school and sat in classrooms that were taught by people who really knew their subject matter, but made school absolutely excruciating for us. I mean, some of the classes that I think back, I mean, how many people hate math or science because they had a teacher who couldn't make it exciting? I mean, I remember I hated chemistry in high school, and in college, I took this chemistry class that was fascinating. And, you know, I mean, in high school, chemistry was like being eaten by an ant. And I couldn't wait to get to class in college in this environmental chemistry course that I've never applied any of and have forgotten all of it, but I enjoyed it at the time. So instead of just being an expert, this is the mistake not only that speakers make, but that I think a lot of event planners make. They look, let's hire some industry experts. Oh, this guy took a company public. Let's have him speak to our business group. Well, that's great, but if they don't have the speaking skills, it's another one of those terrible Chamber of Commerce breakfasts where you steal your neighbor's mimosa and fall asleep in your scrambled eggs because the speaker's up there bloviating about themselves. Anybody who's got a message, I think, needs to learn to be a speaker, not just an expert, but a speaker. It's expertise is only one of the 4 pillars of NSA, and eloquence is so often overlooked. If you can't deliver that message in a powerful way, then okay, you got your words and your slides, and it looks like you're all set up. So I think we all need to realize that we were born not knowing how to say word one, and we have struggled to communicate and connect our entire lives. And if we want to do that at a high level, we need to study the art of oratory. We need to work with coaches and mentors and take the journey. And it's a wonderful journey. So why wouldn't you? Unless you're afraid to be a beginner, as you say.
Right. Having said that, I know that you have extensive background in Toastmasters. So somebody's watching that's not a professional speaker, they're not whatever. They're one of those people that say, I could never talk in front of people. I could never get up in front of people. What would you tell them about your experience with Toastmasters and how that's helped you not only increase your speaking ability, but also give you some insight in how you can help other people increase their speaking ability?
And if I can, I'd like to address people on 2 ends of the spectrum. One is the person that thinks, oh, I could never get in front of people and speak, that the person who's just paralyzed by fear. And the other is the professional speaker who says, Toastmasters, you got to be kidding me. That's for amateurs. And the fact of the matter is, I think Toastmasters is one of the most effective personal and professional development programs and one of the most affordable in the world. And I think of it as my speaker gym. In my time in Toastmasters, I've probably given and or observed over 700 short speeches. And you want to know something? Most of them haven't been very good, okay? Because these are amateur speakers struggling to learn the art, but some of them have been exceptional. And I've learned a lot more from the bad ones than from the good ones. Where are you going to get that education? Or let's say you're working with a great coach. Well, hey, I can give you all sorts of tips and pointers and we'll have a great session. But if you don't find an audience, especially an audience that's not paying you to be your guinea pig, then use Toastmasters to practice stuff, to try new material, to see if your gag lines are going to actually make the audience laugh. And I go twice a week to Toastmasters, and I love it. It's and I've had people say, well, aren't you going to leave that one day? And to me, it's like people who say, well, I'm just going to go to the gym until I'm finally fit, and then I'm going to stop going to the gym. It's the perfect complement to NSA. Find a good group. They're not all good, but there's plenty of groups. Find one, participate, have some fun, and you learn by mentoring other people. You learn by being an evaluator, by encouraging others. The best way to learn is to teach.
Right. Well, let me ask you that, since you put it that way. You and I mentioned earlier that you and we met really as we were in the Florida Speakers Association Speakers Academy, right? And that was another opportunity for us to build on some skills that we already had, supplement. At the time, I was pretty involved in Toastmasters then, to build on some of that. Talk about a little bit about your academy experience and how that may have A, propelled you in your speaking business, but B, entrenched you in the culture of NSA and FSA.
And it's that last part of it that was really it. I'll share a brief story. My introduction to NSA was I was helping a speaker put his book together. And it was George Walter, who's a CPAE speaker. He and his wife at the time were living in a different country every year, and they wrote a book together called Honey, I'm Home. I helped them edit, typeset, design the book, and all of that stuff, put that together. And George was always playing tricks on Barbie. So George called me. I had the proof copy of the book. They hadn't seen the physical copy of the book yet. He said, NSA is going to be in San Diego. I want to send you a plane ticket. and get you a hotel room. I want you to surprise Barbie with the book. So she had no idea I was going to be there. And we met down at the restaurant. George said some friends were going to show up. And I borrowed the manager's Marriott jacket. And I won't make this story too long, but it's such a great intro story to NSA. And where else am I going to tell this story? So you're stuck with it. Anyway, so the waitress, this is all planned. The waitress comes and knew that Barbie was going to order tea with honey because it's all prearranged. And she brought out the tea and the honey. And then she came back with a basket full of little honey packets. Now, George is the coolest, sweetest guy in the world. He says, this is an outrage. Why are you interrupting our meal? We didn't ask for honey. I want to speak to the manager. And of course, Barbie's like, who is this man who's taken over my husband's body? So I come out in the manager's jacket and I say, I'm sorry, there's a problem with the honey. Perhaps you want a different kind of honey. And I pulled the napkin off the plate and I handed her Honey, I'm Home, which was the name of the book.
Wow.
And I watched all of the expressions go across her face. But then I found myself stuck in this convention full of wacky people. It was like going backstage at the circus with the freaks and the acrobats. And I haven't missed a convention since, except for last year's, which was canceled. We all missed it. And I've got my tickets to go next time. And I got pulled into NSA culture, and I met Joaquin de Posada, who has passed on, but I met Joaquin and I met Caroline, who's become one of my best friends. I met her at that event. And so I got pulled into NSA, FSA culture. They invited me to join. I joined the academy. And what's happened is I have found incredible mentors, friends, connections. I just went in and made myself as valuable as I could. I couldn't afford to pay people for the rates that some of these speakers charge. I couldn't afford to pay for that, but I helped people out in various ways. And I've got Hall of Fame speakers on speed dial because they're my friends, not because I'm any big deal or want to drop names, but it's like I went in and got involved, and this community has just been fantastic. It's been like joining a big family. And I don't join organizations, like the old joke, organizations that would have me as a member. I'm kind of a DIY kind of person.
Yeah.
But I Toastmasters is one, and I'm a big NSA person. Not because of all the content, though that's helped me, but because of the people and the connections I've made.
Yeah. One of the things, and I hate to digress, but I'm going to take you
Feel
back.
free. I do it all the time.
I'm going to take you back to this because Caroline, when Caroline and I were talking, she paid you a great compliment. We were talking about, I said, most people would rather be ruined by praise than saved by criticism. And you guys are friends, and I don't know if you've seen that speaker spotlight, but we talked about you behind your back. Although it was going to go out, on YouTube, but we talked about you behind your back. But she said that one of the hardest things was that you helped her on her book, and that you were giving her feedback that was kind of cringeworthy for her, right? But you were giving her feedback that really helped her develop not only that particular piece of work that she was working on, but helped her develop her long-term ability to complete projects, to write, and to be able to critically look at her own stuff. How hard is it to be a good evaluator to someone that you love and that you care about and that you're a friend with? Because I think this is important.
I think it's as easy as paying Caroline. No, I'm just kidding. It's as easy as paying Caroline. Just kidding.
No, but how hard is it? Because sometimes we just, we want to give our good friends, we want to tell them the best about everything. But when you can really give them feedback that helps them grow, I mean, that's real friendship. That's real important stuff that we work with.
I call it tough love coaching. And it's all about putting the softest gloves you can on and hitting as hard as you can. And I think not everybody's open to it. I mean, some people, they can't handle criticism. They're looking for buckets of praise. And I give out plenty of praise. If I mark up a manuscript, for example, there's plenty of smiley faces and, hey, I love this. I try to give credit where credit is due, because when somebody does something great, they should be recognized for it too. But sometimes it's just, look, we're all on this journey of self-awareness.
Yeah.
And look, people bust me all the time for things I would bust my clients for, or my friends. I mean, because, right, it's easy to see problems in other people. That's just the nature of being human. You can see oh, your friend comes to you with relationship problems. Boy, it's clear as day what they should do. But your own relationship problems, you're running around in a cloud. It's easy. So I think that's another reason we learn by teaching. But to me, it's a matter of becoming aware of patterns. And for example, you're talking about yourself in this section. Could you use more you language? Could you say the same thing, but instead of I felt or I wondered, that's turn it around so that the reader understands that you have a message for them. That's one possible kind of criticism. Another one is technical. Hey, you've got all of this dialogue. Someone said this. Can you pour me a cup of coffee? Bill said. Maria, I don't feel like getting up. Maria said. Okay, a little piece of dialogue. Bill looked into his empty cup. Could you pour me another cup of coffee? Maria stretched her arms and laid back in her chair. Sorry, I don't feel like getting up. So just getting rid of said, and letting the characters tell the story. That's something somebody mentored me on, and then I take forward. So whether it's syntax and technical stuff, or trying to think a little bit more cinematographically, if that's the word, a little bit more
now.
There's so many, and I don't know, it's just the way I think. I collect a bunch of these writing patterns and I point them out. Are you using the word I think that you should publish this interview next week, or I think you should publish, do you need that fat in there?
Right.
And after a while, you train yourself to see these writing patterns, to see these speaking patterns, even to see certain types of stories that speakers tell. There's people, the pit of despair stories, where someone takes the audience into a dark place and leaves them there. If you take the audience into a dark place, you'd better bring them back out, because they're in your story. And if you leave them stuck there, then you're creating great business for the therapists in the area, but you're not doing your audience a service. Or the if I can do it, you can do it story, where someone talks about, I had a wonderful wife and family and a great career, and I was making money, and I had a beautiful car, and then I got into drugs and ended up sleeping behind a dumpster, and I covered with newspaper to keep the cold off, and then I had this revelation, and blah 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 blah, and if I can do it, you can do it. And that's all great, and it means well, but first of all, that speaker's doing their therapy on the platform, and they're looking for redemption from the audience, which is really not an active service. And the real dangerous thing is there might be someone in that audience who's struggling with addiction who can't do it.
Right.
And when you find the quote unquote bigger loser in the room without meaning to, like that, then you've just cut off their exits. So there's story patterns, there's language patterns, and everyone's got their own variation, but there's only so many.
Right. One more question. I'm new to speaking. I could be the CEO of Acme Widget Corporation, but I'm new to speaking. Or I'm someone who's in the FSA Florida Speakers Academy. But I really, really want to learn to do this. Give me one or two nuggets from Dave Bricker about next steps, best steps, for them to be able to realize that goal of getting into being a good speaker.
Number one is always start with the transformation for the audience, in terms of how do you know at the beginning, before you say or write word one, how do you want that person in your audience to think, feel, or act different after they've heard your presentation? Because if you start at the beginning with no destination in sight, it's like going to the airport and saying, where am I going today? Guam, Montenegro, Los Angeles? I mean, we don't travel that way, right? We book a ticket to a destination. Your audience does too. The other side, now that's kind of the personal, spiritual side of it. The other side is I know too many speakers who talk about topics that are so soft, and a lot of people who think on Excel spreadsheets, very, very linear
Right.
people, like, I don't get that. And if you can speak in a way that there's, if not a measurable outcome, some sort of quantifiable outcome. So for example, I talk about storytelling because there's an interest in it. According to the 2019 industry survey, it was like the 8th most popular topic. Leadership's always on top, but it's still high enough. Okay. But some people are much more interested in presentation skills because I can give them data that talks about how much money is lost every year to unproductive meetings and unmotivated employees. And now they're doing the money equation. So for example, if your topic is really kind of soft and fluffy, well, that's okay. But maybe there's a way to reframe that topic for business purposes where you're talking about reducing stress. Now you can quantify things. You're talking about increasing productivity. How much productivity is lost to XYZ? Because this is a business and it's not about us getting and sharing our message with the world, because as good as that feels, if you're going to do this as a business, we need to figure, this has been part of the journey I've been on. So in terms of those nuggets, I'd say, first of all, figure out how you're going to transform your audience, and then figure out how you're going to wrap that promised transformation in some sort of a package that corporate people are going to buy.
Awesome. Dave, I want to thank you for your time today. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And I will see you hopefully helping me with some of those things down the road. I told you my launching pad is July the 1st.
This is NSA. We help each other.
All right. So I want to thank Dave Bricker for his time today, man. Some great information on storytelling, as well as on the background. I still don't think he ever finished working on that one sailboat that he
sold it
on at that time.
Got smart and sold it.
He sold it instead of finishing it.
I have a 15-footer. I love it. One day maybe again, but right now I got a business to run and a kid to raise, and
all right,
everything in its time.
Well, thanks, Dave, and we'll see you next week on another edition of the Speaker Spotlight with Florida Speakers Association.
Thank you, James.